Good evening all, and welcome. Are you aware that I have Twitter? Well, you do now. Please go over there and follow me. I've been working on a project for a long time, and I really am excited to share it with you. However, it would be even cooler if you could follow me on Twitter to keep up to date when it launches very soon. So please, give me a follow. Wouldn't hurt to do it on Instagram as well. But for now, it's time to get comfortable and let the darkness take control. My mother has always spoken of a haunting that has bothered her ever since her youth. She talks about hearing footsteps when no one else was home, waking up at night to find a black figure in the corner watching her and her sister. Both my mum and her sister witnessed this event in their teens. My mum speaks of seeing red eyes in glass on occasion, eyes that watch her until she looks away and they're gone. I am convinced there is a malevolent being following the women in my family. But me being the only person who has travelled for an extended time away from the area, I still find it when I stay in one place for too long. When I was a baby, my mum said I creeped her out by telling her there was a black cat in the house. She says I would often point at it and track it around the room, telling my parents what it was doing. This may be normal for infants and toddlers, so take it with a grain of salt. Both my parents confirm that when moving from place to place when I was young, that after a few weeks or months of staying in a place, bumps in the night would show up before long. These were often paired with bad dreams, bad luck, and things like real-life pay cuts and layoffs, as well as odd behavior from me as a toddler. As a toddler, I was terrified of the dark, and often pointed at corners or nooks and crannies saying there was a monster watching me. I don't remember this though. My memories of the being started around when I was 5 or 6. My parents had finally settled down in a real 2-story home and planned to be there for years. We would stay here until I was 18, and here I lived with a haunting of sorts. My first experience was when I went to shower as a young child. Showering and self-bathing were kind of rare, and I was excited to take my evening shower. With a towel in hand, I walked past my parents' bedroom. I glanced into the room to see a dark figure leaning over my mum's side of the bed. I was mid-stride when I saw it, so I ended up walking past the door. I took a step back and it was gone when I checked again. From there, bumps in the night became a thing of normalcy. My bedroom was located right at the top of the staircase to the upper floor, and about 3 to 4 times a week I would wake up around 1 or 2 and listen to footsteps that would start in the living room downstairs, come up the stairs, and pace around the upstairs hallway, as well as pace up and down the stairs. My dad refused to acknowledge this and always told me the house was just settling at night. But the footsteps terrified me because they were not random, but rather in a clear path that was always different from night to night. Things like this became very normal. I was homeschooled for a time via K-12 online learning, so I spent a lot of time at home alone during the day. Footsteps throughout the day, even ones that sounded like stomping, as well as sounds of chairs being scooted across the floor and TVs turning on, were very normal. While they were unsettling, they were just something we all lived with. My sister refused to sleep alone and often came into my bed at night because she said she saw people watching her. More than a few times, if my sister came to my room, I would always hear footsteps go into her room at night. My room and hers shared a wall, and twice I could hear something touching the wall on the other side, like a hand moving across it. Occasionally I would hear her door open and close, and she told me stories of seeing horrifying things at night. This was extremely normal, Yet my dad refused to talk about it, and my mother would simply ignore it. At this time, I had no clue about my mum's history with this being, or my dad's experience with it. So one night I became bold. I wanted the hard truth of what was happening. Anytime I went out into the hallway to see the being, the footsteps would stop. If my door was open, they would stop the second I got out of bed. If my door was closed, they would stop when I opened my door. I wanted more solid proof, so my mum brought me to a motion sensor alarm. It was a simple thing, turned on with a button, and sounded like a beeping alarm when something passed in front of it. I placed it on the half wall that overlooked the staircase and went to sleep. I woke up that night again around 2 or so and heard the footsteps coming from the living room downstairs. They came up the stairs and I was really excited to see what would happen. As the footsteps got closer to the landing, they stopped and I felt an immense sense of dread, like I had opened a Pandora's box, and I did not want to know what was inside it. Sure enough, after a few moments of silence, the alarm went off. It was like my reality had been shattered. It was really happening. After a few seconds, the alarm went off again, only this time it kept going off. It would beep through its alarm and start again, and I knew I had to turn off the damn thing. I got out of bed, and it kept going off. I stood behind my door, hyped myself up, threw the door open, snatched the alarm and whipped back to my room. Sure enough, the alarm was now dead silent. I waved my hand in front of it and it went off as normal. I'm convinced to this day the being was standing in front of me, only I couldn't see it. From here, things get considerably worse. Bumps in the night became something now my entire family were witnessing at once. Everyone downstairs at night, and a clear stomping through the upstairs. One afternoon I came home with my mum, and we heard a clear shattering noise from upstairs, and my mum's glass candle, while still in its spot, but now shattered in pieces. The family all came home one night, and we all heard clearly 2 footsteps on the top of the stairs, like something was running away from us. Dad went through the house with a shotgun, Remington Model 870 Wingmaster for those who care, only to find the house devoid of others but us. I had more and more vivid encounters with the being. One night I woke up to something sitting on the edge of my bed. Something I couldn't see clearly sat on the end, depressing the mattress and shaking the bed. I watched as my covers then slowly were pulled off my feet and felt a distant tickling on my feet. To this day, I will not sleep without tucking my feet into the covers. It was around this time that my grandfather passed away. Myself and my parents went up to the funeral while my sister, who was only 6 or 7, stayed with a sitter. I never saw his body. However, only a few days after, my sister came screaming downstairs to my mum and myself, saying there was a monster in the bathroom. A man with a puffy face and purple ears. My mum became incredibly upset, as my grandfather was diabetic and died from gangrene. His blood had pooled into his face, causing it to swell, and his ears to go a purple black. My mum was now convinced this being was somehow my grandfather. But I am convinced it only used the image of my grandfather to torment her. It would continue to use his image later in the experiences. In the basement, my entire family felt odd where our water heater sat. It was in the corner of the basement and formed a little nook where our fuse box sat behind it. We all said that we felt like something was always watching us from there, and it became so disturbing that my dad built a wall between the rest of the basement and that spot, though it didn't really help any of us at all. I now believe the malevolent being would find a nook or cranny they call home, and that is their resting place, and it seems they are usually not far from some kind of power source, and I wonder if they can somehow pull power from it. In addition, talking about it made it much worse, and strife in the family, like my mother's affair, made activity violently ramp up. Mum and Dad still refused to really talk about it, as Mum was convinced the more we spoke, the worse it would get. My dad simply denied any belief of the occurrences. Our dogs at night would lay in crates in the basement and would often growl and bark at night to be let out. While we all saw this as normal, no one liked going into the basement to get them. Since we moved to Alabama, where we live in a valley between two hills, our dogs no longer bark to be let out at night and wait until morning. My mum spoke of a time when our dog Sasha had puppies. She talked about sitting with our dog petting the puppies, when Mum felt a cold snap behind her. At that moment, Sasha began growling and barking in the empty space, and my mum felt the cold. She was convinced the dogs could see the being. So, let's get into some really horrible stuff. My defining moment of actually watching the being manipulate its environment is when my grandmother came to visit. She slept downstairs in the living room on the couch, but complained after a few nights as she wanted someone else down there with her. So I did that. The first night I woke up around the same time to nothing out of the ordinary. However, I looked out the window to see bunnies in our front yard munching my mum's garden. This was really cool to me, so I decided to stay up the next night and watch them. The next night I stayed up, watching out the window for critters to show up. Sometime late at night, probably around the same time things usually happen, I heard a thud from the basement, then footsteps up the basement staircase. I was convinced this being rested in the basement during most of the day. I sat glaring at the basement floor for what felt like hours, hoping to Christ that nothing would happen. I could see the reflection in our kitchen lights moving on the knob, and sure as hell the door slowly opened only a few degrees and then shut. At least the being is polite enough to close the door behind it. The footsteps then came through the living room towards me, and the reclining chair only a few feet from me began to turn as the footsteps passed by me. The steps then went upstairs. I took my ass back upstairs, shut my door, and went to bed. From here the being began messing with me nightly. I would wake up at night feeling a cold breath on my face, and I would watch as the drawstring to my blinds would start violently swinging, and the dial on my floor fan would turn on and off, fast and slow. This became a normal occurrence over a few months. At this point in time, we all honestly became used to our being, even joking about it when we witnessed weird stuff. You have to live life, and bumps in the night can't stop you from going to work or school and doing homework. One night, my dad and I are standing at the top of the staircase, just talking, and we both hear one of the chairs scoot from downstairs, and my pack of art pencils falls on the ground. Dad looks at me and laughed. I guess it's up for the night. I started trying to talk to it, ask it what it was and if it was actually my grandfather. This was a huge mistake, as now I would get feelings of someone watching me all the time, coupled with things like papers and books being pushed off tables in front of me, and feeling someone physically touch me throughout the day, as well as horrible nightmares. The nightmares all had a consistent theme. I'm doing something normal when something paranormal starts to happen. I react with anger, and then the event becomes so out of control that my anger turns to dread. Something will then happen involving the color red, like red light seeping in from under a door or through a window, accompanied by some kind of deafeningly loud noise. I'd then wake up, believing I was about to be hurt. This actually trained me to do something in real life, where I can now force myself awake from a bad dream. Cool trick, but I wish I'd never needed. My girlfriend at the time started complaining a lot about weird stuff around her house, and let it be known, I did not talk to people about these occurrences. I never wanted to be seen as weird or insane. She talked about someone touching her at night, turning lights on and off, and someone stomping through her house. So we started Skype chatting all through the night, leaving the call on while we slept. She complained about hearing voices from my end, but I still don't believe her. One night I woke up to blaring static through the call, which makes sense to me, as if sound levels drop off for long enough, the call will balance to white noise. I grabbed my phone to turn the call off, but something inside me told me to just watch. I watched as her covers were pulled off her chest, and something began picking at her shirt, like literally her shirt was being pulled up by an invisible hand. Ended the call. Never told her, for knowing it would probably make it worse. It got to a point where I was having experiences at her house. Random stomping through her house, as well as one time she left me in her room to make food. I watched as her light switch turned off and on literally in front of my eyes. I walked out the room and muttered something like, "Good to see you, buddy," and no lie, the light in the hallway and her room both switched off. She started saying she was having dreams about a dark figure watching her through her doorway at night. Bad stuff all around. And it gets worse. The being is now becoming much more ballsy. I wake up one night, and often I would look at my wall opposite to a massive window I had. We had a willow tree in the back and a power plant behind that. It was far away but cast this orange light in my room at night, painting a somewhat gorgeous shadow of the willow branches and leaves swaying in the wind. I often watched this at night when I couldn't sleep. But one night I wake up. No creepy stuff to speak of, so I go look at my wall. There is now a clear outline of a man. The shadows of the tree are somewhat blurry from how far away the light source and trees are, but the being is crisp and clear. It is slowly swaying in the branches. I said something like, "Okay then," and turned around and went to sleep. The next night I watched the shadow for hours, but no figure appeared. I honestly forgot about it happening, and a few weeks later I woke up and sure as hell it's there again, but now in a different spot, away from the tree shadow. It's in its own spot. It's completely still. I got a little ballsy too, and decided to go up to it, so I got up, walked over, and it was only a few inches shorter than me. I couldn't see an outline of ears, but clearly a man's shadow. I touched the wall. It wasn't cold or burning hot. Nothing was honestly out the ordinary. I calmed down standing in front of this thing and said something like, "You're confident," and the head turned towards me. I shook my head in disbelief and went downstairs to make a coffee, only to never see it again. After that, my dad went on a hunting trip downstate, only a few hours away. He'd be gone a week. Mum is having sobbing episodes, saying at night she can smell cherry tobacco smoke like her father used to have. I swept this off and told her it was probably just nearby garbage burns. She started sleeping downstairs with the dogs in the room. My sister started complaining about things bothering her at night, but apparently way worse than normal. She won't say what, but she starts sleeping downstairs with my mum and dogs. So I stay upstairs by myself. I go to bed, and I can hear what sounds like our kitchen stool hitting the living room floor. Well, my mum and sister are down there, so it's probably them. I'm laying in bed. I can't sleep. My ears are full of this crushing, bass-like noise. I feel like something bad is about to happen, but I don't know what to do. I turned in bed and looked at my floor fan, and it then turns towards my door and flops over, but with some air like it was thrown a bit. I freaked out, started sobbing and ran downstairs. Everyone freaked out. While Dad was at his trip, he fell down a hill into poison ivy and suffered a lot of cuts on his hand. Omens, man. That morning, Mum asks me if I tripped on the stool, and I told her I didn't. The stool was at the bottom of the staircase, so I stood it up and pushed it over. We both agreed that wasn't the sound. I pushed it off the bottom step and it still didn't sound right. From there, I picked up the stool to where she could just barely not see it behind the couch and dropped it. Sure as hell, she gasped. We both did, because it was the same noise. Who knows? Shortly after I graduated, we all moved to Alabama. We live between two hills in a bit of a valley, and the activity has entirely stopped. The feelings of being watched, the lingering fears, gone. It's like night and day difference. Now my parents have opened up to me. Mum explaining that her mother experienced these things too, and she thinks that my grandmother actually introduced this being into our lives because she talked about always regretting what she brought to us. What does this mean? I don't know, and it sounds too much like a horror movie for me to take it seriously. Mum now will tell us she's been dealing with it her entire life, but she says my experiences are not as bad as hers. She talks about being pushed out of bed, having the dogs in the room with her as they start growling at the door, and a shadow can be seen pacing from the light sweeping under it. She says there was more, but she doesn't want to talk about it. My sister refuses to speak of it, but again says that she's seen much worse than I have. Now, my dad talks about it. He says that because he stayed up late at night with online classes, he saw a lot of the weird stuff. Shadows passing by the open door. Things being moved while he watched. Things being moved to different places when he turned away or went to the bathroom. He says he never liked living in our old house. My family rarely leaves the state, but I do often because of continuing school up north and having long-distance relationships. My 2 girlfriends I've had since then complained when I stayed for too long. It seems to be the 3-week period. When I stayed with my girlfriend for a month after my grandma's funeral, the occurrences started up there. It was this feeling of being watched, an uneasy fear. It probably didn't help that her mother was super into talking to the dead, seances and stuff. Well, one night I'm laying in bed with my girlfriend on my stomach, and someone clearly comes stomping to the foot of the bed. I'm expecting to see her mother trying to catch us doing the dirty, and I turn around, but there's no one there. But there is cold wafting over me. I lay back down, and when I close my eyes, I see 2 red eyes within my eyelids. I sat up, rubbed my eyes, looked around the room, and sure as hell, they were there, in a mirror, in her kitchen. 2 bright red ovals. I stared at them for hours. Mum wasn't lying. I actually use these eyes in my art. When I draw a demon or a skull, I always put them in the socket. I kind of whispered to it, that I knew what it was and that I wasn't afraid. I felt a touch on my shoulder, looked away, looked back, and it was gone. At this point, my girlfriend's mum comes shambling into the room, saying that weird stuff is going on, and that you guys have got to get to my room. So myself, my girlfriend and her mum and 2 sisters are in the room, and we're just listening to stomping and stuff being knocked over and moved in the rest of the house. Eventually it stops, and we fall asleep. I go visit my friend on his wedding. I'm only there a few days. I planned to be there for 3 but stayed longer, and after I left he told me he had an awful nightmare of being in a recliner chair, one that started spinning, and red lights began filling the room with the sound of screaming filling his ears. He doesn't dream much, so it bothered him. He then talked about hearing someone walking around in his house and lights turning on and off when he left the rooms, but again, it eventually stops. Most recently, I went to visit my newish girlfriend, not the same one from earlier. She has a kid who has kind of become mine as well. All is normal, but she is much more interested in the spiritual. This is further south in Florida, where the land is flat. We start having weird things going on, hearing things in the apartment, and now her kid is waking up at night screaming and crying while he pulls the covers into him. She says this is abnormal for him, but again, children, so grains of salt. I start getting weird feelings, but I'm trying to shake them off. But one night her kid starts crying again, only this time he isn't wailing, he's whispering, in this sheepish cry for mummy to come help. She freaks out because he apparently doesn't do this. I go to open the door and I feel a quick 1-2 thud on the door from the other side. I'm thinking, crap, I hit him with the door. I push the door open, he's cowering in the corner. My girlfriend asks me why I took so long to open the door. I didn't know what to think at this point. The last point was now we had decided to sleep in the bed with him, instead of sneaking off the couch in the other room. I'm getting a weird feeling, but whatever. Her child then sits up in the night and is pointing at the door telling me to open it. I tell him to go to bed and he starts screaming, "Okay, I'll get the damn door." I open the bedroom door and he's now waving his hand from one corner of the room to the door, saying, "Get out!" Creepy, okay, but he's barely 2, and again grains of salt. Keep in mind he speaks in pretty much single words. This is now the clearest I've ever heard him speak. He stops crying, looks down at the bed and says clear as day, "Every goddamn weekend." I shoot out of bed and I'm freaking out. My girlfriend grabs him and she's freaking out. And we put up cameras the next morning and haven't had an incident since. So now I'm back home. And again, nothing weird to report. My girlfriend says it's the iron in the hills keeping the being from getting to us, but I don't know. Maybe she's right. She likes tarot cards and says that she can kind of gather that there is something following the female line in the family, and that it's not of this world, meaning the spirit isn't human. Perhaps she's right, but it still seems far-fetched to me. What concerns me is that by using a pendulum with an alphabet, she'd tried talking to it, and it spelled out a name that neither of us remember what it was by now. The only thing weird that happened here is that my mother and I had the same dream one night. We don't talk much, with me being full-time in school in the local area and now working full-time. But one night I had a dream where I walked to the top of my staircase and a black figure was in our yard watching me. But not like the figure I saw up north. This was taller, skinnier, and I didn't feel threatened, only intrigued. Like my other dreams, I started to get mad. But now, it was in front of me. I fell on my back and woke up in my bed. I looked over to my door, which was shut, and went back to sleep. The same night I dreamt I was in my bed, the same position I went to sleep in, and turned over to my door. My door was now open, and the being was leaning in my door, watching me. I rolled over and then woke up to the being close as it was before. I fell asleep, just a dream. That morning my mum said she had a really weird dream that a dark figure was watching her through the door while she was in bed. She said it felt real, like she may not have been dreaming. I told her I had the exact same dream, and we were both convinced it's an actual being, but not the one we're used to. This was not threatening or harming us in any way. I'll call it the Wanderer. I think it's simply curious, maybe trapped in the hills. I have never seen it or had another bad experience since then, which at this point was some years ago now. Most recently we took a family trip to Nashville and stayed in a hotel for a few nights. We weren't talking about our experiences, so the dream kind of came out of nowhere. But I dreamed that I was standing in our old yard up north, and my mum was maybe 10 feet away from me standing by the road. The black figure was behind her and put a hand on her shoulder and told me, "I will never stop following. I will always find you." That honestly might have been a dream, but I don't know. My mother and sister apparently have had much worse experiences than me, which horrifies me because what I've seen is no laughing matter. You can think I'm crazy, you can think whatever you want. I'm not a crazy paranormal junkie. I will note, however, I cannot find anything on the internet pertaining to the red eyes, other than they symbolize an evil being. In BuzzFeed's Unsolved Stories, which I enjoy watching, people freak out in the dark as much as anyone. And they'll talk about the Sally house having spiked activity in a cracked wall. This reinforces to me that evil beings will find a nook or cranny to call home. Furthermore, I'm convinced there is a world within our own, a world of truly evil spirits and beings we don't understand. I don't know how much I believe in God or in heaven, but I believe in hell or something like it, and demonic entities that call this world home. Ever since I was young, I have experienced strange things that I tried to listen to my parents about. They told me it was nothing. But now as an adult, I'm starting to doubt that. I'm a 33-year-old male. Once I woke up at night and the covers of my bed were being ripped off. The lights in the bathroom down the hall started turning on and off by themselves. I confirmed it wasn't one of my siblings, as I screamed like a banshee for my dad and had him check around in the bathroom. There was no one there. I have plenty more stories like this to share, but they would be incredibly repetitive. Instead, just know that this is generally what my childhood was like, filled with feelings like I wasn't alone when I physically was, and every so often, it would transcend into the physical world, like the covers flying off my bed. I know it sounds crazy, perhaps like something written up in a cheesy B-rated horror movie, but I'm not the kind of guy to lie, especially when trying to share something so personal. No. The main story happened when I was 20. There was one major event that happened, but that's a story for another time. My girlfriend at the time and I went up to North Carolina to visit my sister, who had recently moved into a house that was over 100 years old. It was very cool, and I could definitely see the attraction. The first thing I did while I was there, which was separate from my girlfriend, because I remember being upstairs and exploring the rooms with no one in there. I always do this when I go to a new place. I love to explore. In one of the rooms upstairs, there was a closet that had stairs. They seemingly went to an attic. There were cobwebs everywhere. I remember being excited to check it out, but as I ascended each step, I felt like something was stopping me. A feeling that said, no, you can't go up here. So I stopped with a weird feeling, shook it off and went back downstairs to join my girlfriend and the family. That night, they gave us one of the guest rooms to sleep in. My girlfriend and I fell asleep pretty quickly, because we had been driving all day. I can't confirm what time it was, because when I was awoken in the middle of the night, I did not check my watch. I just know that it was pitch black outside, and both my girlfriend and I had woken up at the exact same time with no reason that we could find, except that the temperature in the room dropped. It went from a cool night to very cold in less than a minute. As we were asking each other why we were awake, the doors that were right next to the bed that led to the hallway began shaking violently. Not only that, but the doorknob was rattling and turning as if someone was desperately trying to get into the room. My girlfriend and I sat frozen in the bed until the event stopped. Wanting to be the tough boyfriend, I said that I would get up, just to check to make sure it wasn't one of my nephews playing a joke. I opened the door and saw no one. I slowly crept into the hallway down the hall and checked each room one by one. I know my sister and her husband wouldn't have done it. That would be absurd. They were in their late 30s and are not the joking type. I found my way to my two nephews' room, and not only peeked but slowly walked in and gave them a poke to be absolutely positive they weren't awake. When they both groggily looked at me, I knew that no one had been joking around with us. I made my way back to the room, told my girlfriend everyone was asleep, and we tried our best to forget about it. At this point I pondered if this could have had possibly anything to do with trying to get into the attic. When I thought back, the cobwebs were odd. I was the first one to try and go up there in a long time, it seemed. I have no idea how after being woken up like that, but we eventually managed to fall back asleep. Then, terrifyingly, it happened again, exactly as before. My girlfriend and I both woke up, the temperature dropped, then cue the door shaking violently and the doorknob turning. We were horrified, but just as before, I got out of bed and checked every room where people were sleeping. We must have fallen back asleep. The next morning I went downstairs and immediately pulled my sister aside and told her what happened. She laughed and thought it was crazy. People always do. No one ever believes me, least of all my family. I wanted to share this with all of you to see what you guys made of it. Honestly, I'm a bit nervous. I've never shared anything like this, but I'd like for you to know that it is entirely true, and any information you can have would be greatly appreciated. These events occurred in my home, which is in the suburbs next to a major highway. When my older brother was 3 to 4, he slept in his room that is on the back corner of my house, so 2 walls lead to the outside. He was in this room when he heard a sound above him, either in the attic or the roof, then another one on the other side of the wall that leads to the backyard, and then one further away from the wall. All of this occurred within a span of 5 to 7 seconds, so whatever it was moving fast, or there were 3 of them. Confused, he went to the living room to tell my mum, to which she asked what the sound was like. Like a low whistle, he said. My mum didn't think much of it and told him it was probably an owl that swooped by. This happened around 1999. Well, 19 years later, my room is in the opposite end of the house than my brother's, and is basically running along the side of the house from the front to back, with a long window that goes across. I keep it covered with curtains though. The path outside of my room that leads to the backyard is closed by a big gate that makes a noise when you slide it open, and a tall wooden fence divides me and my neighbor's property. The bed I sleep in is right up against the windowed wall, and my desk is on the other side of the room next to my door. My room door leads to the kitchen, which has a sliding door that leads to an unfinished room that only has a floor and a roof and is open to the elements. The fact this was unfinished means the wooden floor was suspended by stones, making it difficult to traverse without making a sound, as it's basically hollow. This information is important for later. My mum, my brother and I were in my room telling creepy experiences we've had. Keep in mind this was around 1 a.m. I was sitting on my bed and my mum was on the chair in front of the desk, and my brother was at the doorway of my room. We're facing each other in a triangle formation telling the stories. My brother's story about the whistling came up, and I found it intriguing, so I queried him about it. The conversation went something like this. Wait, so you heard a whistling sound? Yeah, it's the best I can describe it from what I can remember. So it's like this? Yeah, kinda. At this point we were interrupted by a low whistle sound identical to mine coming from the direction of the noise gate, which also happened to be behind where my mum was facing. My mum and I look in the direction of it, though we couldn't see whatever was causing it. We looked at each other with a look of, "You heard that too, right?" My brother didn't hear, so we explained to him what happened, and he had a ponderous face. We found it strange, but brushed it off to a dog with an incredible sense of coincidence. The thought that it sounded like me bothered me, but again, surely it was a coincidence. But it wasn't long until that secure thought would be crushed, like crisps under bison. We had moved on to a different tale when we all heard the exact same whistle again. This time it was right behind me, on the other side of the window and in my property. The only way to get there was to open the noisy gate or climb over the neighbor's fence. I didn't dare look outside, and we were all baffled. We all agreed that it was creepy, but surely it was the final time we would hear it. The same thing happened, where time passed before hearing it again, yet this time behind my brother, which would be in the unfinished room next to our sliding door, which was probably unlocked. How could they have gotten there without making a single sound? Even when stepping cautiously, it's near impossible to be quiet while stepping on the wood, especially with someone who's completely unfamiliar to the layout of the house. We heard it a fourth and final time at the original spot near the gate, and at this point we were so shaken as to what it was. First, it appears as a coincidence, then it mimicked me. It traversed around my house without making a sound and lastly whistled only when it was directly behind one of us. It wasn't long before we called it a night, and I had to sleep in that room with the thing mocking me. My parents had previously slept in that room for years before I did, and they never heard anything like that. And I haven't heard it before or since that day. I still ask my brother and mum about it once in a while just to confirm that it did happen. It always gives me the chills just thinking about it. This happened when I was about 10 years old. I used to live in a really small 2-bedroom home. At the time, I shared my room with my older brother, since my little brother was too small to sleep with us. This home used to be rented out by this old couple, and apparently they died there too. My mum used to tell me that she used to see the old lady and old man in their wheelchairs at night. The old couple would just stare, and after a while would smile and wave. They seemed really kind and friendly. Now, I'm partially blind and don't use glasses because they don't work for me. Because of this, I never thought I would experience anything for myself. One night, I was trying to walk to my room, and my mum forgot to put something away. So naturally I ran into it, and could clearly hear a female voice say, "Be careful," right before I ran into it. My parents were asleep. No way it was them. And the voice didn't sound like my mum's voice at all. Another time, I was going to the bathroom, which is right next to my room. The hallway where the rooms and bathrooms are is facing the living room. So this time I was facing the door to my room, and I see a shadow on the door. I started walking by but noticed that I saw it. So it stopped, waved, and then continued walking towards the kitchen. My brother and I would always tell my mum we felt our beds shaking a little at night. Not a violent shake, but enough for us to feel it. I don't think this was all caused by the elderly couple that passed away there. I think there was something else there too. And sometimes it was scary, but other times it was comforting. I haven't noticed until a year ago, when during the summer I had horrible sleep paralysis, where a dark, abnormal, tall silhouette with bright white teeth was standing on my bed. Keep in mind it was bent over from being too tall, and this isn't an exaggeration. There have been multiple things that have happened in my life that I'm not too much concerned to, as they don't tie with anything. But when I was younger in the night, I would always hear thumps coming from the attic above my room. There is a wooden entrance, in fact, to the attic, and the attic is tall enough to crawl into. I was creeped out by it and one day asked my dad to look in there. There was absolutely nothing, and the thumps stopped. Then they happened in the walls. It's been less frequent as of late. I believe I also have a ghost cat in this house in which we reside. You can sometimes feel it walking across the bed and laying on a part of your body. It seems docile enough. When I'm alone, in the woods behind our house, I'll hear noises that can range from being an animal that's not nearby to this loud guttural growling. I recently acknowledged the beings and told them to leave us in peace, but they seem to be more active now. 3 days ago, I jokingly said that my brother's car was possessed because of the constant tapping and ticking sounds were happening along with the radio acting odd. Later that day, we almost crashed coming home from church. All I remember hearing before the crash was something that sounded like a chain rubbing against metal at 60 miles an hour. The next night I awoke at 3 a.m. It's dumb because it's always 3. I voiced something along those lines and then went back to sleep. But I woke up not an hour later to a horrible feeling of bugs crawling all over me. I've been having phantom feelings of bugs on me since then. Can someone please tell me what to do? My family don't believe me, and I'm scared. Hey guys, it's Mort here, and thank you so much for listening. Twitter link is in the bio. Go ahead, not the bio, description. Go ahead and check that out. I know you're gonna really not regret doing that. It's also super useful. I do sometimes post interesting things on there. Oh, and a small victory for us. There was a guy who a lot of you have brought to my attention who had a channel called Scary Stories. He had been re-uploading my content for a while, and thanks to you guys, I found out about him, and I reported a lot of his videos, which were my videos anyway. And it seems like all his videos have been taken down. Not just the ones that he re-uploaded of me, I think there were a few others that he re-uploaded of other people. But thank you. If it wasn't for you guys in the community helping me do that, we would have never have managed to take him down. If there is someone re-uploading my videos, and trust me, there is never a shortage of those people, feel free to let me know, email preferably, with a few links so that I can try and take them down as well. They really are prevalent, and they just don't stop. It's annoying, and it takes time, but I'm glad that that one got his channel shut down. Or her, I don't really know who they are. But yeah, thank you as always to everyone, especially my members and my patrons whose names have been on screen for a while now. You guys are amazing. And if you would like to help support the channel by donating a small amount of money every month, you can do that if you want, link in the description. But for now, it's time for me to sign off and remind you that Twitter needs to be followed, if you want. Stay awesome, and I'll see you in the next one.